Imagine a crow sitting all alone on a tree, feeling utterly miserable. Its feathers are dull, its wings are small, and no one seems to care about it. It's the kind of sadness that comes when you feel unnoticed, unloved, and unimportant. This crow wasn't just sitting there, it was crying, tears falling from its eyes, questioning the purpose of its existence. Why does no one care about me? It thought. Why is my life so empty? I have no beauty, no value. People avoid me, and I'm always hungry. Why am I even here? The crow's thoughts reflected a deep sense of sorrow, a feeling that many of us can relate to at different points in our lives. It wasn't just about being ignored or mistreated. It was about not finding any sense of belonging or worth. Have you ever felt like that? Like you're constantly surrounded by people, but still feel completely alone? Like nothing you do seems to matter, and no one sees you for who you truly are? It's a painful experience, one that leaves us feeling small and insignificant. The crow's life felt like a never-ending struggle, and its mind was consumed by negativity. It couldn't see beyond its own limitations, its own lack. It couldn't find anything good about itself. And so, sitting on that tree, it cried and cried, hoping for some kind of relief, some kind of answer to its sadness. At that moment, something unexpected happened. A monk was sitting beneath the tree, meditating in silence, when a drop of the crow's tear landed on his cheek. The monk, who had spent his life seeking wisdom and understanding, slowly opened his eyes and looked up at the crow. He could feel the crow's pain, the depth of its sorrow. Compassion swelled in his heart, and he approached the crow with kindness. "Why are you crying, my friend?" the monk asked, his voice calm and gentle. The crow, still overwhelmed by its emotions, replied through its sobs, "Oh wise one, I am so sad. I feel invisible in this world. People ignore me, I'm not loved, and no one gives me anything to eat. My life is full of suffering, and I don't know why I'm here. I feel like death would be better than this life." The monk listened carefully to the crow's words. He understood that the crow's pain came not from the circumstances it faced, but from how it viewed those circumstances. He knew that the crow was trapped in its own mindset, focusing only on what it lacked, not seeing what it already had. The monk gently responded, "You are suffering because you are focused on what you don't have. You need to learn to be happy with what you have, right here, right now. Happiness does not come from comparing yourself to others, or wishing for something you don't possess. It comes from accepting and embracing who you are, where you are." But the crow, still caught in its sadness, couldn't fully understand the monk's words. It continued crying, unable to let go of the belief that it was not enough. "I don't know how to be happy with my life," the crow responded. The monk, seeing the crow's pain but understanding the depth of the lesson he needed to teach, said, "I can help you. I can give you a mantra, a way to change your life. But before I do, I need you to understand something very important. What you believe about yourself shapes your reality. Your happiness is not in what you have or don't have. It's in how you perceive the world around you." The crow, desperate for a solution, perked up a little. "What must I do?" it asked eagerly. The monk smiled and said, "I will help you become whatever you want to be. But first I want you to go and find a swan. Ask the swan if it is happy with its life. When you return, I will give you the mantra you seek. Go now, and learn what true happiness is." The crow, hopeful for the first time in what felt like forever, flew off in search of the swan. This was the beginning of the crow's journey, an adventure that would change its life forever. It wasn't just a journey to find happiness, it was a journey to understand the nature of happiness itself. Often we look outside ourselves, searching for answers in the people around us, or in things that we think will make us happy. But true happiness, the kind that lasts, can only be found within. The crow was about to learn this lesson the hard way. The crow, now filled with a glimmer of hope, flew swiftly towards the pond where the swan swam gracefully. It marveled at the sight. The swan's feathers gleamed white as snow, its movements elegant and effortless, gliding across the water with such peace and beauty. The crow, still haunted by its own feelings of inadequacy, approached the swan and said, "Oh, magnificent swan, you are so beautiful. Your feathers are as white as milk, and everyone loves you. Surely you must be the happiest bird alive. Look at me. I am plain, black, and unnoticed. No one cares about me. If I could only be like you, surely my life would be better." The swan looked at the crow with kind eyes, but instead of boasting or expressing joy, it sighed deeply. "You think I'm happy because I am beautiful," the swan said. "But the truth is, I am not happy. You see, while I may appear perfect on the outside, I am constantly burdened by my own perfection. There are so many beautiful colors in this world, and yet, I am all white. I am nothing but white, and I long to have the colors that other birds possess. I envy the parrot, whose feathers are vibrant and full of life. If I were a parrot, I believe I would be much happier." The crow was taken aback. It had come to the swan believing that the swan's beauty and elegance would be the key to happiness. But instead, the crow found that even the swan, in its perceived perfection, was struggling with its own dissatisfaction. The crow had expected to hear the swan declare that it was the happiest bird in the world, but instead it heard the opposite, a bird who was constantly searching for something more, someone who was looking outwardly for happiness instead of within. The crow, now feeling a little confused but still hopeful, decided to continue its search. If the swan with all its beauty is not happy, then surely there must be a bird who is truly happy, the crow thought. The crow, though frustrated, had learned an important lesson. Beauty, status, or admiration from others didn't guarantee happiness. And yet the crow still didn't fully grasp the lesson that was unfolding. It was still in search of a solution, still believing that happiness could be found in something or someone else. Flying away from the swan, the crow set its sights on the parrot. The parrot, with its colorful feathers and lively personality, seemed to embody the joy and vibrancy that the crow so desperately wanted to feel. Perhaps the parrot, too, would offer the crow some answers. The crow flew quickly, its wings cutting through the sky, desperate to find the next clue on its quest for happiness. The parrot was waiting, perched on a branch in the middle of a bustling market. People gathered around the parrot, admiring its colors and engaging with it in awe. The crow watched for a moment, before finally approaching the parrot. "Oh, beautiful parrot," the crow exclaimed. "You are so colorful and radiant. Everyone loves you. You must be the happiest bird alive. You are admired by all who see you, and I can only dream of being as vibrant as you are." The parrot, however, looked down at the crow with a sad gaze. "I'm not happy, my friend," the parrot said. "Yes, people admire my colors, but I live in constant fear. People keep me in cages, and I am always afraid that I might be trapped forever. I envy the peacock. He is even more colorful than I am, and he must surely be the happiest bird in the world." The crow, once again, was stunned. Here was another bird that had had everything the crow had envied: bright colors, attention, admiration. But the parrot too was not happy. It felt confined, trapped in a life that was supposed to be full of joy, but was instead full of anxiety and uncertainty. The crow had hoped to find the secret to happiness in the parrot, but instead it found another bird looking for a way out of its own unhappiness. In that moment, the crow realized something that it hadn't before: external beauty, the attention of others, and admiration weren't the answers to happiness. Both the swan and the parrot, though seemingly perfect and admired, were dissatisfied with their lives. They were still searching for something outside of themselves, something they believed would bring them the happiness they longed for. And in the midst of all of this, the crow began to wonder if neither of these birds could find happiness. Where else could it turn? After leaving the parrot, the crow was determined to find a bird who was truly happy, one that had everything it needed to feel complete. The crow flew tirelessly, its wings carrying it through the skies in search of the perfect creature, one that had all the beauty, admiration, and freedom that it thought would lead to happiness. Finally, after much searching, the crow found its answer. It had heard stories of the peacock, the most beautiful bird in the world, adorned with iridescent feathers that shimmered like jewels. The crow had always looked at the peacock with awe and envy, believing that this bird with its extravagant beauty must be the happiest of them all. The crow flew into a zoo, where hundreds of people were gathered, taking pictures and admiring the peacock's majestic feathers. It perched nearby, watching the crowds, mesmerized by the way the peacock strutted with such confidence, the way the people were drawn to it, fascinated by its beauty. The crow thought to itself, if anyone is truly happy, it must be the peacock. Look at how many people adore it. Its beauty is unparalleled. The crow's envy grew as it observed the peacock from afar, its heart heavy with longing for the same kind of attention, the same kind of admiration. But when the crowd finally dispersed, and the peacock was left alone in its cage, something unexpected happened. The crow, driven by a need to understand, approached the peacock. "Oh, magnificent peacock," the crow called out. "You are the most beautiful bird in the world. People come from far and wide to admire your beauty. They adore you. They worship you. Surely you must be the happiest bird on the planet." The peacock, who had heard many such praises over its life, looked down at the crow with a weary expression. "No, my friend," the peacock replied softly, its voice tinged with sadness. "I may appear beautiful to others, but I am not happy. My beauty, my feathers, they are a curse. People admire me from afar, but they don't see the pain that lies within. I am trapped in this zoo, unable to roam freely as I wish. I am constantly in fear that someone might pluck my feathers for decorations, causing me great pain. What others see as perfection is for me a prison. I envy the freedom you have as a crow. You are free, and you are not trapped by beauty or by the expectations of others." The crow was stunned by the peacock's words. It had believed that beauty and admiration from others were the keys to happiness, but the peacock's words shattered that illusion. The peacock, with all its grandeur, was imprisoned by its own beauty, unable to experience the freedom the crow had taken for granted. The crow realized that the more attention and admiration the peacock received, the more it was trapped in a cycle of expectation and confinement. The peacock had become a symbol of perfection, but in truth it was far from free. In that moment, the crow understood something profound. It wasn't about having the most beautiful feathers, the most vibrant colors, or the most admiring audience. Happiness was not something that could be earned through beauty or admiration. It was something that came from within, from freedom, from being true to oneself. The crow had been searching for happiness in the wrong places, thinking that external attributes like beauty or status would lead to fulfillment. But the peacock, despite being the most adored bird, was just as unhappy as the crow had been at the start of its journey. With this new insight, the crow flew back to the monk, its heart filled with understanding. It had searched for happiness in others, in their beauty, in their admiration, but had come to realize that happiness could not be found by comparing itself to others. The crow had learned an important lesson. Each bird had its own challenges, its own form of suffering, regardless of how perfect or admired it appeared to others. No one had a perfect life, no matter how they seemed from the outside. As the crow sat before the monk once more, it no longer felt the desperate need to change itself or become something it was not. It had finally understood that true happiness was not about comparing oneself to others, or seeking approval. It was about embracing who you are, and being at peace with your own life. The crow had spent so much time longing for what it didn't have, comparing itself to birds with brighter feathers, or more admirers. But now, it saw that happiness was not something to chase outside of itself. It was already inside, waiting to be discovered. As the crow returned to the monk, its heart was heavy, but its mind was clearer than ever. It had spent so much of its life seeking happiness, through comparisons, through envying the beauty and freedom of others. It had believed that it needed to change itself, to become like the swan, the parrot, or the peacock, in order to feel complete, in order to be happy. But now, after its journey, the crow understood that all of that had been a futile chase. The more it compared itself to others, the more it lost sight of its own worth. The more it looked outside of itself for validation, the more it found that the things it admired in others were not as perfect as they seemed. The swan longed for colors, the parrot longed for freedom, and the peacock longed for release from its own beauty. None of them were truly happy, just as the crow had once believed it couldn't be happy in its own feathers. Sitting in front of the monk once again, the crow felt a sense of calm that it had never experienced before. The monk smiled at the crow, sensing the change in the bird's demeanor. "You have learned an important lesson, my friend," the monk said gently. "You have been searching for happiness in all the wrong places. Happiness is not something you can find by becoming someone else. It is not something you earn through admiration, beauty, or comparison. True happiness comes from within, from accepting who you are, and being at peace with what you have. The crow nodded slowly, its mind beginning to grasp the depth of the monk's wisdom. But how do I find happiness within myself? The crow asked, its voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. The monk looked at the crow with deep compassion. You already have everything you need to be happy, my friend. The monk explained. The key to happiness is acceptance. It is about accepting yourself, exactly as you are, and being content with what you have. Happiness is not found in what you don't have, or in trying to become someone else. It is about appreciating your own life, and recognizing the beauty in your own existence. You are not meant to be the swan, the parrot, or the peacock. You are meant to be the crow. And when you embrace who you truly are, when you stop comparing yourself to others, you will find that you are exactly where you need to be. The crow thought deeply about the monk's words. It had spent so much of its life wishing it could be like someone else, someone with more beauty, more admiration, more freedom. But now it understood that the pursuit of someone else's life would only leave it empty. The crow had been so focused on what it didn't have, that it had failed to appreciate what it did have. The freedom to fly wherever it wished, the strength to survive on its own, the ability to live without the constraints that came with being admired or worshipped. The crow realized that in trying to be like the swan, the parrot, or the peacock, it had lost sight of the beauty in its own life. It had a unique gift, the ability to be content with simplicity, to find peace in being true to itself. The crow's life wasn't about being perfect, or being loved by everyone. It was about being free and being itself. It didn't need to conform to anyone else's expectations or desires. It didn't need to be something it wasn't. It just needed to accept who it was, right in this moment, and appreciate the life it had created for itself. The monk continued, it is easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to be different, to be better, or to change ourselves in order to find happiness. But the truth is, we are enough as we are. Happiness comes from learning to love ourselves, from recognizing our own worth, and from being grateful for what we have. When we stop comparing ourselves to others, and start appreciating the present moment, we open ourselves up to true joy. The crow felt a sense of peace wash over it. It had been searching for happiness outside of itself, but now it understood that true contentment was found within. It was not about being like someone else or achieving some ideal of perfection. It was about being real, being authentic, and embracing the beauty of its own life. The crow no longer felt the need to compare itself to the swan, the parrot, or the peacock. It was enough, just as it was. The crow turned to the monk with gratitude in its eyes. Thank you, it said softly. I understand now. I don't need to change who I am. I don't need to be like anyone else. I can be happy just as I am. The monk smiled, his heart full of warmth for the crow. Remember this lesson, my friend. Happiness is not something to be sought externally. It is found within, in the acceptance and appreciation of who you truly are. With newfound clarity and peace, the crow took off from the ground and soared into the sky, its wings strong and steady. For the first time, the crow felt truly free. It no longer needed to compare itself to others. It had found the secret to happiness, not in changing itself or becoming someone else, but in embracing its own uniqueness and accepting its life as it was. The crow was no longer trapped by envy or comparison. It was free to live its life, fully and authentically, just as it was meant to. The crow flew higher than it ever had before, feeling a sense of freedom that it had never known. For so long, it had been burdened by its own insecurities, comparing itself to other birds, and wishing it could be different, wishing it could possess the elegance of the swan, the vibrancy of the parrot, or the grandeur of the peacock. But now, as it soared through the open sky, it felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from its wings. The crow was no longer tethered to the false beliefs that had once controlled its thoughts and actions. It had let go of the need for approval, the desire for admiration, and the urge to conform to an ideal that wasn't even its own. With every beat of its wings, the crow realized how beautiful its life truly was, how rich with opportunity and freedom it had always been. It no longer needed to seek happiness from others, or chase the validation of the world. The monk's words resonated deeply within its heart. Happiness comes from within. The crow understood now that its worth was not determined by how others saw it, or what it possessed. but by its ability to appreciate its own existence, to recognize its unique place in the world. No other bird could live the life of the crow. It was its own, and that was enough. The crow had spent years struggling with the belief that it wasn't good enough as it was. It had looked at other birds with envy, believing they had the answers to happiness. But now, with newfound clarity, it saw that each bird had its own set of challenges and struggles. The swan may have been admired for its grace, but it longed for colors that it could never have. The parrot may have been colorful and captivating, but it lived in fear of being caged. The peacock, despite its stunning beauty, was confined to a zoo, unable to experience the freedom the crow had always taken for granted. The crow had always been free to fly, to roam the skies, to live without fear of being trapped or confined. It had its own form of beauty, its own unique life, and that was enough. The crow's journey had taken it through a deep transformation, from a bird of self-doubt and comparison to one of self-acceptance and peace. It had learned that no matter how much it wanted to change, the only way to truly be happy was to embrace who it was, to accept itself fully, without the need for external validation. There would always be someone who had more or less than it did, and there would always be someone who seemed to have a better life. But the truth was that those comparisons were irrelevant. The only life the crow could control was its own, and it had the power to choose how it would live it. The crow now understood that true happiness was not a destination, but a state of mind. It wasn't something that could be found in others, in achievements, or in material possessions. Happiness was a choice. It was the decision to appreciate what was already present, to be content with who you were, and to find joy in the simple things. The crow no longer needed to chase after something it already had. It no longer needed to measure its worth against anyone else's standards. It was enough, just as it was. As the crow continued to fly, it felt a deep sense of gratitude for its life, for its freedom, for the lessons it had learned along the way. It had come to understand that happiness wasn't a result of external circumstances, but a result of the way one chose to see and experience the world. When you stop comparing yourself to others, and start appreciating your own life, you begin to experience true contentment. The crow realized that its freedom was its greatest gift, and it vowed never to take it for granted again. No longer burdened by the desire to be someone it was not, the crow felt a sense of peace that it had never known before. It was free from the weight of comparison, free from the desire for validation, free from the constant longing for something more. The crow had learned to embrace its own life, to appreciate its own unique journey, and to find happiness in the simplicity of just being. It was no longer a prisoner of its own thoughts or insecurities. It had unlocked the door to its own freedom. The crow's journey had not only transformed its understanding of happiness, but had also led to a deep inner peace. It had learned to stop looking outward for happiness, and had started to look inward instead. Happiness, it realized, wasn't something to chase. It was something to cultivate within oneself. And now, as it soared through the sky, the crow was truly free, knowing that it was enough, just as it was. As the crow continued its flight, a profound sense of peace began to settle within it, like a calm that flows over the ocean's surface after a storm has passed. It wasn't just the freedom of the open sky that filled the crow with contentment, but the realization that it no longer had to seek happiness in the opinions of others, or in comparing itself to the lives of those around it. For the first time, the crow felt truly whole. It no longer needed to chase after the fleeting desires of status, beauty, or recognition. Instead, it was learning to savor the simple, yet rich experience of being present in its own life. The crow could now see that the constant search for more, for something else, was the root cause of its unhappiness. It had spent so much of its time focusing on what it lacked, never realizing that true fulfillment came not from achieving more, but from appreciating what was already there. It had the gift of flight, the ability to roam freely, and the capacity to experience the beauty of the world without the chains of expectations or the weight of comparison. It had always had these gifts, but it had never fully appreciated them until now. The crow understood that happiness didn't reside in being someone else, in having the things others had, or in meeting the standards society set. True happiness, it now knew, came from within. It wasn't a distant goal or something that could be obtained through external validation. It was a state of mind, a choice. The crow realized that it had been given everything it needed to be happy right from the start. It just needed to learn how to recognize it, how to embrace its own life fully, without regret or longing. With this new wisdom, the crow could see the futility of comparing its life to others. There would always be someone richer, smarter, or more beautiful. There would always be someone with more freedom, more possessions, or more admiration. But the crow knew that none of those things would guarantee happiness. True peace came from being at home with oneself, from knowing one's own worth, and from accepting that life was never going to be perfect, and that was perfectly okay. The crow had always been comparing itself to others, measuring its worth against their beauty, their freedom, and their external successes. But now, it realized that comparison was an endless cycle, one that could never lead to satisfaction. The more you compare yourself to others, the more you lose sight of your own unique path. The crow had been so caught up in this cycle, thinking that if it could only change into something else, it would find happiness. But now, it understood that happiness was not in transformation, it was in acceptance. It was about being the best version of yourself, not trying to be someone else. As the crow soared higher into the sky, it felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey it had taken. It had gone from a bird full of sorrow and longing, wishing for a life that wasn't its own, to a creature that was at peace with its existence. It now understood that its worth was not determined by how others perceived it, but by how it perceived itself. It no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. It didn't need to be perfect, it just needed to be real, and in that authenticity, it found a quiet joy that no external circumstance could take away. The crow knew that it was not immune to challenges or difficult moments. Life, as it had come to understand, was not always going to be easy. There would still be times when it would face obstacles, when it would feel the sting of rejection or the weight of loneliness. But now, it had the tools to face those moments with grace and wisdom. It didn't need to seek validation from others. It could find strength within itself. It had learned to trust its own worth, and that was all it needed to remain steady in the face of adversity. The crow continued to glide through the air, feeling the wind beneath its wings, its heart light and free. It was no longer the same bird that had sat on that tree crying, seeking a different life. It had discovered the power of self-acceptance, of recognizing that it was enough just as it was. The crow now understood that happiness was not something that could be found by changing oneself or chasing after external ideals. It was found by accepting the present moment, by embracing the person you are, and by appreciating the life you have. And so as the crow flew on, it knew that its journey was far from over. There would always be more to learn, more to experience, and more to discover. But it also knew that it had found the greatest secret to happiness, the peace that comes from within. The crow was no longer searching for something it didn't have. It was living fully in the richness of what it already was. The journey of self-acceptance had freed it in a way that nothing else could, and with that freedom came a peace that would stay with it forever. The crow, now soaring through the endless skies with a heart full of peace, understood that its journey was not just about finding happiness. It was about realizing that it had always been there. Happiness wasn't something to be obtained from the outside world, or from becoming someone else. It was found within, in the quiet moments of self-reflection, in the acceptance of one's own life, and in the gratitude for the simple beauty of being alive. The crow's transformation was profound, a shift from dissatisfaction and comparison to contentment and joy. It had learned that the key to happiness was not a distant destination, but the acceptance of its own unique life, its own imperfections, and its own gifts. It no longer needed to compare itself to others, because it understood that everyone's journey was different, and no one's life was without its struggles. The crow realized that in focusing on its own path, it had unlocked the peace it had been searching for all along. Looking down from the sky, the crow now saw the world from a new perspective, one filled with compassion, understanding, and a deep sense of connection to all living beings. It could see the beauty in all the birds it had once envied, knowing that they too had their own challenges, their own stories, and their own lessons to learn. The crow no longer needed to be anything other than what it was. It had found its place in the world, and in doing so it had found its peace. In that moment, the crow realized that the greatest gift it could give itself was the freedom to simply be. It had spent so much time longing for what others had, believing that it was missing something, but now it understood that the only thing it needed was to embrace its own existence. Happiness wasn't something you chased, it was something you allowed to unfold by accepting yourself, by finding peace in the present, and by appreciating the life you have. As the crow continued its flight, it carried with it a profound sense of calm, a deep knowing that it was exactly where it was meant to be. It no longer needed to look for approval or seek validation from anyone else. It had learned to trust itself, to honor its journey, and to live fully in the moment. The crow's story was a reminder to us all that happiness is not found in external achievements, in comparing ourselves to others, or in chasing after some ideal. It is found in the acceptance of who we are, in the gratitude for what we have, and in the peace that comes from being true to ourselves. And so the crow flew on, not because it needed to go anywhere, but because it had finally learned the art of being. With a heart full of joy, and a spirit soaring freely, it knew that its journey had only just begun, not because it had to find happiness, but because it had learned to live it.